Hi, everybody. I hope you are having a fabulous day. Um, I've had a wonderful day. In my neck of the woods, we are actually gearing up for Thanksgiving. I know some of you might be doing the same. In fact, today at my office, we had this wonderful meal. We all brought things. We sat around the table. We laughed. We had just such a beautiful time of fellowship. And, it's such an important time for us to stop and think about the things that we are thankful for, things that we are blessed with in our lives, because we all have those things. If we stop and think, we all have blessings and we all have things to be thankful for. But when I look over the past year, one of the things that I am probably the most thankful for, the thing that has blessed me the most, that I have enjoyed the most, is I was blessed with the opportunity to get to teach a Bible study, and I taught it. It was an adaptation of the devotional that I wrote back last year about this time. I released this 40-day devotional. And so the Bible study that I led this year, I got to take this and adapt it into a Bible study. It's this but deeper. We go deeper in the Bible study. And it was such a blessing, not just to get to take this material and take it a little deeper, but it was such a blessing because the ladies that I taught, they came with hearts open and ready to learn the word and to dig in and understand the Bible more. And this Bible study and this devotional is based on Exodus 34. Exodus 34, as I started to dig into this, I realized that Exodus 34 is such an important chapter of the Bible. It's almost really a foundational chapter of the Bible. It gets overlooked a lot because it's not the first time that Moses goes up Mount Sinai. It's the second time he goes up Mount Sinai. And sometimes it gets a little buried, but the things that God teaches Moses about himself on Mount Sinai on that second time up the mountain are just life changing. They're life altering. And so I had so much fun uh, doing this Bible study with these ladies. But the last week that we had our Bible study, we were kind of moving our Bible study out of the Old Testament and bringing it into the New Testament. I had a friend that when I first started writing this book, he said, if you're going to write this, you need to find a way to connect this to the New Testament. I'm like, this is how you connect Moses to the New Testament. The New Testament's about Jesus, not about Moses. But as I started to dig, I started to realize there was a huge connection between Mount Sinai and the New Testament. And the last week we met, we talked about how God moved Moses' story out of the Old Testament and into the New Testament. Now, if you know the story of Moses, Moses led a very stubborn, stiff necked, whiny people in the desert for years and years and years and years. He did everything. He stood in the gap for these people. He taught them the law. He taught them everything that God was telling him to teach them. He he was he did everything for these people. He was their advocate in every single way. And then one day he lost his temper. And I don't know if you know the story, but he lost his temper. He lost his temper in front of the whole nation of Israel. And he did the complete opposite of what God asked him to do. And because of that, he got some really bad news. And he was not able to go into the promised land. And I have to believe that Moses was disappointed that he wouldn't be able to go into the promised land with these people that he had worked so hard to teach, to mold, to make, to try to pull them out of the slavery that they chose to keep themselves bound to. They had such a hard time letting go of their lives of bondage in Egypt and putting themselves under the authority of a God who loved them so much. And Moses, here, he makes a mistake and he doesn't get to go into the promised land. I have always struggled with that. I've always struggled with, how God, why was God so harsh? He one thing, and God said, no, you're not going in. You're not going in. But if you look at the rest of the story, oh, it's so much better. Like, I think it's so much better than Moses could have ever imagined his story to end. You see, Moses' story does not end in ashes. Oh, no. God had a much bigger plan, a much better plan. See, I really believe, and I've begun to wonder as I've looked more and more at the story of Moses, I wonder more and more whether God's keeping him out of the promised land and keeping him from leading his people into the promised land was punishment or protection. Because let's think about this. Moses, he was pretty old. He's about 120 at this time. And can you imagine at the age of 120 having to not only trudge through the desert with these people that were still not, they were still complaining, they were still being stubborn, they were still being stiff-necked, having to first cross the Jordan River. Have another beautiful water story there. Before they go into the promised land, they cross the Jordan River. And then on the other side of the Jordan River, with Jericho right in view. I mean, Jericho was like right there. And God says, okay, everybody stop. I want you to circumcise all the males. Jericho's right there. Jericho's been waiting for this nation that's been wandering out there in the desert. They've been waiting for them to come into full view so they could take them out. And here they were in full view. And God says, okay, let's stop. We're going to circumcise all the males of fighting age. So basically leaving the nation of Israel vulnerable with their enemies right in view. Now, Moses probably would have been up for another water story, but I'm pretty sure that Moses would not have been up to being circumcised at the age of 120. I'm pretty sure that was not high on his priority list. So I sometimes wonder whether it was God's punishment or God's protection that kept Moses out of the promised land. So God takes Moses, he buries him by his own hand. Only person in the Bible that God ever did that for. He buried Moses himself. Can you imagine Moses being interviewed? So, who was your undertaker? It was God. What? It was God. No, it was God. He buried me. It's okay. Get over it. He really did. He buried Moses. And I have to believe in my holy imagination that when Moses closed his eyes on this world, maybe a little disappointed as he closed his eyes on this world because he didn't get to go into the promised land. And then he opened his eyes into glory. I have to believe that Jesus was waiting there going, dude, we're not done. This is going to get so much better. It's going to get bad for a little while, but then it's going to get so much better. It's going to be awesome. Just wait. We're not done yet. We're not done. Because we find Moses in the New Testament. If you've read the story of the Transfiguration, you see Moses there on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus, with some of Jesus's disciples, and with Elijah. So Moses comes back. It's almost 1900 years later, and Moses comes back. God brings Moses back. And not only does he bring him back, they believe the Mount of Transfiguration was probably at the very top of Israel, in the area of Galilee, high up on a mountain. We see that in scripture. They don't tell us what mountain, but they say it's high up on a mountain. So he was at the top of the land, top of the promised land, on a high mountain to where he could see all the land below him. And not only did he get to see the land, but in Exodus 33, Moses has a request of God that God does not grant. Moses asks to see the face of God. God said, no, I can't do that. I can show you my back, but I can't show you my face. Well, here on the Mount of Transfiguration, not only does Moses get to plant his feet in the promised land, but he gets to look upon the face of God in all his glory, in all his transfigured glory. He was looking at the face of God. Oh, Moses' story did not end in ashes. Moses' story did not end in disappointment. It may have been a little bitter there for a little while. He had to wait 1,900 years. That's a long time. But oh, the beautiful way that God ended Moses' story. And I have to wonder how many times we fight God when he does something and we have a hard time understanding why we're walking through a hardship, why we're walking through a struggle, why we're walking through pain, while we're walking through disappointment, while we're walking through all those things, and we think, God, what are you doing? And we fight against God because we think we know better. And we think we can write our story better than God can. But you know, I have come to realize that maybe, just maybe, our lives would be a whole lot better if we stop trying to write our own stories and allow God to write them instead. Do you think Moses would have chosen to traipse into the promised land if he could have chosen that? If he could have written his story, do you think he would have chosen that way? And maybe, just maybe, he would have missed out on the beautiful way that his story actually ended. Now, there's a quote by Elizabeth Elliot. It says, "Of one thing I am perfectly sure, God's story never ends in ashes." Moses' story did not end in ashes. God had a beautiful, beautiful, redemptive way for Moses' story to end. And your story is not going to end in ashes either. I don't care what it is. I don't care what you're facing. I don't care how impossible it looks. 1,900 years, y'all. 1,900 years Moses had to wait. But his story did not end in ashes, and neither will yours, and neither will mine. So on our darkest days, let's stop fighting God and trying to write our own stories and allow him to write them instead.